I could have spent £40 on packaged snacks from the supermarket, but I challenged myself to see if I could make these snacks for less at home. I've picked some of our favourites and I'm going to have a go at recreating them a little bit later on. I'll let you know how much my total spend came to, but I can tell you now it was nowhere near as expensive as if I'd bought these snacks in their packaged form. The first snack I'm going to make are bagels. We absolutely love putting bagels in the lunchbox as they're pretty good for holding fillings like tuna or egg mayonnaise. And I will say I am guilty for buying bagels from the shop. So I'm going to be having a go at making my own, like so. And this time I'm actually going to boil them. In a previous video, I had a go at making bagels, but I did the Greek yogurt version. Although they came out okay, some people in the comments did say, if you're going to make a bagel, you've got to boil it. So I'm trying again with a slightly different recipe, and I'm really keen to see how these turn out. So I've made the dough and I used my Thermomix to knead it, and this will now prove whilst I get on with the rest of the recipes. You might notice in the background of some of my proving clips that I also had a go making these no-knead bread rolls. And although they were really tasty, I think the recipe needs a little bit of work. And I only really want to share recipes that I would 100% recommend to a friend or a family member. And this one isn't quite there yet. Next up, I'm going to make a really easy recipe to swap, which are these Rice Krispie squares. I mean, who doesn't love them? But they are full of lots of extra ingredients that the kids don't need, so I'm going to make a slightly healthier version at home. Now, if you were to have a look at the ingredient list on the back of these in the shops, they are so full of lots of extra things. This was one I definitely wanted to try doing at home. The other reason why I wanted to have a go at making these at home is for a pack of 4 Rice Krispie squares, you're looking at paying about £2.25, which to me seems pretty expensive because the ingredients in it aren't really that expensive at all. Now, with my Rice Krispie squares, what I've done is I've melted together the first set of ingredients, which is the golden syrup and the butter, and I've added in some cacao powder instead of melting down a bar of dark chocolate. The reason I did that is I have cacao powder in the cupboard and I wanted to keep the costs down to fit with the budget challenge. Now, because of this, I am using a little bit of golden syrup here to act as the binder, as if you've ever made Rice Krispie squares before, you know you might sometimes use marshmallows to be that kind of sticky substance to hold it all together. So I've stirred this mixture up, and if you think it still looks a bit runny, you can always add a little bit of extra golden syrup. Then I've added in some oats alongside the Rice Krispies to try and help keep the kids fuller for a little bit longer when they eat these treats. I've also stirred in some sultanas, and once I've pressed it into the tin, I have pushed in some chocolate chips on the top as well. And now this will go to set whilst I make the rest of the recipes. Next up, I'm going to make some mini muffins. And again, if you were to pop down to your local supermarket in the UK in the bakery section, you're looking at paying about £2 for a pack of 12 mini muffins. And again, they have quite a long list of ingredients in them. And so I'm making these at home, and this is a recipe I love making. I make one big batch of batter, and I use overripe bananas and sultanas as the main sweetener in this batter. And then I split it in two and I add in 2 different flavours. So this time I'm going for blueberry, which I'm using frozen blueberries to keep it budget friendly. And I'm going to put chocolate chips in the other batch. Now, there is a caveat here. If you really want to make these muffins ultra processed free, you can use a high percentage dark chocolate and chop into fine chunks. But I didn't have any of that in the house, so I'm using some chocolate chips, which I do appreciate have some extra ingredients in there. So something I really love to do when I am batch cooking, especially when I'm batch making snacks, is to make one base batter and then split it into 2 so that I can make 2 different flavours. So that's what I'm going to do now. So my first batter is going to be chocolate chip, and then the next one will be blueberry. So I'm just going to split some off into this bowl. I quite like using the soaked sultanas in here because it adds a bit of extra sweetness without having to use too much refined sugar or extra sugars. So that's the chocolate chip one. Then for the blueberry one, I quite like using frozen blueberries because they're a bit more cost effective and they work pretty well in baking. I always use far too many, so I'm going to try and be a bit more restrained today. As especially if you're using frozen ones, they do release quite a bit of liquid when they're cooking. So I have held back this time. That's the blueberry batter. Now all that's left to do is fill my molds. So I invested in some of these mini muffin molds as they're really good for lunchbox size portions, and you can make quite a small amount of batter go a long way if you use a portion like this. Now, as you'll see, I'm using a mini muffin tin, so I can make up to 48 muffins in one go using a recipe like this. And I quite like doing mini muffins as they can go quite a long way in a lunchbox and are just the perfect size to take into school. Now, I'm really lucky that I live near a shop that seems to constantly have overripe bananas on offer, and I love using overripe bananas to sweeten baking, and especially in this set of recipes because quite a few of the recipes here do have refined sugar and golden syrup in them. So this is one recipe where I'm using bananas as one of the main sweeteners. I've also used some sultanas, which I've soaked in warm water until they swell up a little bit. You'll also notice that in the base of my muffins, I've used some chia seeds. I absolutely love using chia seeds in baking just to boost the nutrients and to act as a binder as well. And actually, if I was to make those Rice Krispies again, I think I'd probably put some chia seeds in there too. So whilst the mini muffins bake, I'm going to make my next set of recipes, the first being lemon mini loaf cakes. So recently we got into buying these Bon Maman pre-packaged lemon cakes, and they do have fewer ingredients than some of the other options out there. When they're on offer, they are about £2 for a multi-pack of 7, which isn't too bad, but when they're full price, it's about £3, which is quite a lot for the amount that you get. This is probably one of the most sugary recipes that I've made in the batch, but these will be a lovely treat for the kids. And as you'll notice, I did have a bit of a fail here. Somehow I've lost the base of my lemon juicer. And so zesting these lemons was a little bit messier than normal, as was the juicing side of things. I love the fact when you make a lemon cake that you can really pack in so much flavour from the lemon zest and the lemon juice. And the kids absolutely love this recipe. So now they're going in to bake. I'm going to get my last set of muffin batter ready. And this time I'm doing savoury muffins. I'm now going to make some savoury muffins as a lot of the packaged snacks are quite sweet. And sometimes we like getting these higgidy spinach muffins if we are running out for a picnic and we haven't had a chance to make anything. But they are so expensive for how few muffins you get. And I might be biased, but I think these ones taste nicer and they last really well in the freezer. Now, these muffins are using a blended flour, and part of the flour is made up of lentils, which I have blitzed in the food processor. Now, if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I love this trick. I think it's a great way to add extra nutrients to baking. But the key thing is you can't replace all of the flour with lentils, or it will change the texture of the bake and have quite an overpowering taste. So I've blitzed up a small amount of lentils here, which I will combine with my flour in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to start by popping my flour into the mix with the lentils first and then the self-raising flour. And then one trick that I do like to do at this stage with these muffins is I find if you add a bit of this mustard powder, it just makes them taste extra tangy. So I always like to hop a little bit of this in. It is optional, but I quite like the flavour it adds. Next up, I'm adding some softened butter and some milk. Followed by the eggs. Recently, we've been trying to get our kids doing a little bit more baking. and they love this stage where they get to crack the eggs. And to be fair, they're getting pretty good at it. So I'm just going to stir these in. And finally, I'm going to add in the cheese. Last time I made these muffins, I used feta cheese in half of the batch, and they did not go down well with the kids, which is why we are going all cheddar this time. So the mix is now done, and now I'm going to separate it off into 2 bowls so that I can do 2 different flavours. In this half of the bake, I'm using frozen chopped spinach, and I find this a lot easier than bothering with welting fresh spinach and then squeezing out the moisture and finally chopping. This is just a lot faster, and I find that I waste a lot less spinach if I'm using the chopped frozen version. Now it's time to get the sweet muffins out of the oven so I can pop these in the tins. When we have picnics, we do like to have a mix of sweet and savoury options in there. In the shops, these are £3.50 for a tiny box. And I mean, it's so much easier to make that for less at home. I love this recipe. We always have some of these muffins in our freezer, and they just go down so well in lunch boxes. So I'm going to pop these into the trays, and these will go into the oven to bake. And although it does, look like I am making a very large amount of food here, I would say for a short amount of time of concentrated baking, you can really fill out your freezer. And for me personally, it just makes those school mornings so much easier when I know I can just open the freezer, pop a few of these into the lunch boxes. It just saves me so much time. So I've gone through quite a big chunk of the baking now, and I'm going to go back to my bagels. And I'm so delighted to see how much this dough has risen. I will hold my hands up. I am not the best person at making bread. And so when I come to this point of the proving, it really is a 50-50 as to whether the bread will have risen as it's meant to have done. But this is looking pretty good to me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm shaping the dough into some ball shapes and then popping a hole in the middle of each one. And then these will sit to rest for a little bit longer before I'm ready to move on to the next stage. But so far, so good. I've also shaped my bread rolls as well, and they're going for their final proof. I'm now going to have a go at making some mini cheddar style crackers. Our kids love mini cheddars. This was a good excuse to treat myself to a new tool to use in the kitchen, very much like one of their Play-Doh tools, I thought, when it arrived. And it's such a simple cracker dough to make. You hardly need many ingredients at all. And essentially, you just combine flour and butter, rub it together, add a little bit of mustard powder to make the cheese taste extra tangy, add in the cheese and some water to bring the dough together. And then what I've done is I've taken 2 sheets of baking paper and I've popped the dough between them. And I'm using that to roll the dough out really thin. Then I've got my new cutter and I'm cutting them into some little shapes. And these will then be pricked with a fork once they're on the trays, ready to go in the oven. And I've used the baking paper that I sandwiched the dough between as the baking paper that I would cook them on in the oven, to save any waste. Now, I normally like to multitask whilst I'm baking and doing these time challenges, but this time round, I am exclusively watching these in the oven because they're so small, they could burn quite quickly. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on these. But as you can see, they've come out so well, and I know the kids are going to absolutely love this. So I'm now going to go back to my bagels, and they're still looking really good, which I'm delighted about. And I've brought a pan of water to the boil, and I've added in a tablespoon of sugar. And now I'm going to lower the bagels into the water and boil them on each side for 30 seconds. I feel like as the time went on with me boiling these bagels, I got a little bit better at judging when I should be flipping them. And they do start to look like they're swelling up a little bit more in size. And once they are all boiled, I've popped them on some lined oven trays. And next I'm going to move on to putting my toppings on. So I've simply whisked up an egg yolk. I'm going to brush all of the bagels with some of this egg wash. And then you can add whatever seasoning you want to put on the top. So for my bagels, I used a mix called za'atar, which is really, really tasty and has lots of different spices and flavors in it. And I just thought it would add a nice bit of color and also a great taste to the bagels. So once these have all been seasoned and egg washed, they're going to go in the oven. Again, I'm going to really keep an eye on these. I want them to be nice and golden, but I don't want them to be too firm because my plan is to freeze them sliced and then I will just reheat them in the toaster. The last time I made bagels, they just were a bit too firm on the outside, so I'm keeping an eye on these. Next up, I'm making some Belvita soft bake bars. And again, I was amazed by how many different versions there were of these to choose from in the supermarket. These were also not the cheapest of snacks, £2.75 for a box of 5 bars with a huge list of ingredients in them. So what I've done is I've made a simple dough, I've added in some chocolate chips, and I've pressed it into a baking tray really flat. So once the bagels come out of the oven, these are going to go in. And then when they come out, I am slicing them whilst they're warm, but leaving them in the tray, and then I will lift them out once they're cooled. So I've deliberately left this recipe until the end of the bake because the last time I made these, they burned because I was trying to multitask. Now, my kids absolutely love Maryland cookies. They're so handy to have these little bags in, if you're going for a picnic. They're £1.50 for a multi-pack of 6. They're not super expensive, but again, they're probably not one of the best things that you could be feeding to your kids. And it's such a simple dough to make at home that you can actually make quite a lot of them at home for not very much money at all. Now, the first time I made these, I underestimated how much they would spread in the oven. So you do need quite a bit of patience for this, as you just need to pop them in very small blobs on your baking tray. Then they will go into the oven, and they do need to be watched to make sure they don't overcook. So there you have it. We've reached the end of the bake, and I have made a selection of some of our favourite packaged snacks for much less than they would have cost if I had bought them in the shops. Now, as a reminder, had I have bought the same quantity of snacks in the shops, it would have come to just over £40. And I was able to make all of these lunchbox fillers ready for the freezer for £20. So I'm delighted with that. I've saved 50% on the cost of the snacks. They're all homemade. They're in my freezer. None of it's going to be wasted. And I've saved myself so much time, especially on those busy school mornings. Hopefully this video has given you some inspiration on how you could recreate some of these shop-bought treats and snacks for lower cost at home and with fewer ingredients. All of the recipes will be shared via the link below. And if you liked this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps support my channel. I have made some other snacks videos which are available on my channel, and some have less refined sugar than this video if that's more your cup of tea. So be sure to check them out. And thanks again for watching.